Can you believe it? I've been doing this music review video nonsense now since 2022, and I've only been able to talk about my favourite band retrospectively. At least until now, as The Blue Nowhere, the 11th studio album from progressive metal darlings Between the Buried and Me, is finally on the horizon. I have a lot of words, thoughts, opinions, etc. to spill, so let's cut the introductions and get right down into things. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog rock and metal. Yeah, okay, I'm really not mincing my words here. I would categorically call Between the Buried and Me my all-time favourite band. My all-time favourite album is Colours, my all-time favourite bassist is Dan Briggs, and my all-time favourite song is Cell Keys. So yeah, I'm a little bit of a nut for the band. I've seen them live around, God, I don't know, maybe about a dozen times now. I could probably a cappella most of their albums from start to finish if I had a big pack of Strepsils on hand, and I've even named some D&D characters after some of the songs. I friggin' love Between the Buried and Me. But it is my love of the band that's made me cautious with this review, and why I felt it prudent to be as upfront about this love as I could be right from the off. Personal biases always colour our words, our opinions and our feelings, and I can't pretend that I didn't go into The Blue Nowhere with a somewhat heavily positive-leaning bias. But in my endless quest to be taken seriously as a music journalist and not just as a ravishingly attractive, heavily bearded gremlin creature, this is the first time I've actually listened to a new album from the band with a critical ear and not just one from a lifetime devoted fan. I've had to dissect this album in ways I never really thought about in the context of Between the Buried and Me. And you'd think by now, with well over 200 reviews under my belt, I'd have figured out a method of attack. I'd just do what's worked every single time for every single album I've ever spoken about. But I've never reviewed Between the Buried and Me before, never approached an album with this kind of an automatic sense of squealing excitement before, never felt the pressure of applying judgment to the band whose music has unironically saved my life before. But you know what? I live for this sort of challenge. Bring it the f*** on. Let's talk about The Blue Nowhere. So, now that you know where I'm coming from and how equipped I am to talk about this record, let's rip the band-aid off. This is not as good as Colours, Parallax 2, or The Great Misdirect. There, did it, it's done, I've laid the cards on the proverbial table. But to The Blue Nowhere's credit, asking an 11th studio album to be better than the literal cream of the band's creative crop would have been a, frankly, ludicrous demand. We all knew going into this that they were never going to be able to better those records. Come on, there was just no quantifiable way. Sometimes you know when a band has reached their creative peak, and there's no shame in being comfortable with that and accepting that whatever comes next will never hit you in the way that their classics did. All that being said, though, The Blue Nowhere is absolutely fucking excellent, and if this was an album coming out from any other band, I would be raising pedestals for it, heaping endless brown-nosing praise upon it, and basically hissing angrily at anyone who dared say anything bad about it. Look, A-tier BTBAM is still triple S-tier for most of the competition, so there's the quick version of this review if you don't want any details or spoilers. If you do want to hear a wee bit more about this record though, and why I feel this way, then stick around. Things are about to get detailed. So first of all, let's briefly discuss the massive goddamned elephant in the room. Dusty Waring is gone. The band is a four-piece now, and Paul Wagner is basically playing double duties here on lead and rhythm. Now, I don't want to get into any of the kind of he said, she said debate about why Dusty is gone. That's for you to do your own research on, and this review platform certainly is not the place for me to air my thoughts and feelings on the matter. But the good news is that Paul is basically a god on guitar, and if you didn't know Dusty was the Moose, you probably wouldn't really be any the wiser. But what of the remaining three musketeers? Dan Briggs continues to demonstrate precisely why I consider him to be the greatest living metal bassist by hitting out lines and grooves that made me literally scream shut the f*** up about a good half-dozen times in the opening 2 tracks alone. Blake continues to demonstrate that his arrival into the band's catalogue back in 2005 in Alaska was one of the most important turning points for the band, as his skin work is nothing short of miraculous, throwing in some of the most complex rhythmic work from him to date, in a career already built on polyrhythms and complex time signatures. And then, of course, there's key slinger and microphone pundit Tommy Giles Rogers Jr., who provides one of the most varied and accomplished performances of his career on this album, in all respects. His growls are less monotone and there's a certain spark and fury behind them. His cleans are varied and interesting, with so much characterization behind every single line he puts out. And as for the synth work, good lord, if you told me that the band that wrote The Silent Circus were going to pull some of the weird shit you hear on this album, I'd have called you a bold-faced goddamn liar to your face and pouted at you. So Ian, get to the point. Talk about the songs, I hear you cry. Okay, look, I'm getting to that. Do not rush me here. I'm eulogizing. The Blue Nowhere is a 10-track album across 71 minutes of music. It's shorter than Colours 2, but longer than the collective efforts of Automata 1 and 2. This is about a fairly typical length for a Between the Buried Me album these days, let's be honest here. But in a little bit of a break from tradition, eschewing outro tracks, the album doesn't end on a big fat epic, although Beautifully Human certainly has an epic tone regardless of its length. So in that respect, the structuring is a little different from what we've come to expect, with the album coming in what I consider to be 4 quite distinct phases. The quirky and unpredictable first 3 tracks, which includes the pre-release singles and God Terror, the short, snappy and partly ambiental interludes of Pause, Door Number 3 and Mirador Unicoil, the beefy smash the crap out of you heavy lifters of Psychomantium and Slow Paranoia, and then the triumphant send-off of the final 2 tracks. You see, this is where the Blue Nowhere is playing its ace card. This album really has a bit of everything for every kind of Between the Buried and Me fan. If you love their heavier and more aggressive metalcore sound, they've got you covered. If you like your weird experimental proggy stuff, then guess what? Seat at the table for you too. Are you a fan of Tommy's solo work? Because, you know, we've got that as well. But this does also bring me to one of my few criticisms of the record. It's simply not as identifiable or singular in its characteristics as the band's previous releases. You know, if I think of Parallax 2, I think of like this big sci-fi concept album, I think of Coma Ecliptic, I think of the nice one to ease people into the band with. I think of The Great Misdirect, and I think of the great big bloody proggy one. You get the idea here, right? The Blue Nowhere is kind of a greatest hits album of entirely new material, if that makes any sense at all. The ideas here are all engaging and interesting, but there's nothing overtly new or daring. This is, for better or for worse, Between the Buried and Me in a concentrated, slightly predictable form. With that criticism taken into account, though, for a long-time fan like myself, I'm honestly okay with this. Especially this deep into the band's career, they don't need to keep reinventing the wheel, especially on album 11. Would I be so generous if they were still to be doing this on album 15? Probably not. But at the end of the day, every band is going to have a creative shelf life. So for Between the Buried and Me to have reached this deep into their career before starting to echo their own ideas back at them is pretty darn impressive. So let's get a little bit deeper into things, shall we? We've likely all heard the singles of Things We Tell Ourselves in the Dark and Absent Thereafter at this point, and we're familiar with the classic prog influences of the former and the weird hillbilly hoedown stylings of the latter. But what of the other songs? How about the punkish, anarchic, dark electronica of God Terror? The whimsical musical theatre interludes between the soaring guitar-fueled drama of Slow Paranoia? The almost friendly, catchy-as-hell radio rock of the title track, or the complete brain-smashing unga-bunga mode of Psychomantium? The Blue Nowhere is an album that refuses to ever sit still, and it's an absolute smorgasbord of treats as a result. For an album to exceed around 50 minutes in length, I feel it needs to be varied to keep things interesting as a result. As to only sing from a solitary hymn sheet for nearly an hour is crime enough to get you thrown in rhyme signature's jail. Addendum, please do not ask me what my jail looks like. I really don't want to get demonetized. The density of the album can occasionally work against it, as while listening to this record over and over and over for this review, it was only around the 7th or 8th listen that I started to figure it all out. The light bulb snapped on. This is dense music, and I mean, yes, that will come as no surprise to anyone familiar with the band, but this feels, I don't know, especially so. Colours 2, retrospectively at least, despite being 80 minutes long, managed to stick in my head much quicker than the Blue Nowhere did. But after I cracked this nut and extracted the fluids within, I found an album that was rewarding and satisfying in ways I'd not felt from the band since the mighty Parallax 2. The two-hit combo of Psychomantium and Slow Paranoia brings parallels to the likes of Son of Nothing segueing into Answer the Sky, or Disease Injury Madness into Fossil Genera. It feels like the main course of the album, and is certainly the section of this banquet that I've gotten the most replay out of, but that isn't at all to dismiss the rest of the album. The singles are killer, as we already know, but God Terror is an immediate blast of refreshing fury, and the comparatively hopeful ending of the title track and Beautifully Human gives an interestingly different angle compared to the over-the-top, fury-ridden, speaker-busting finales that we've mostly become accustomed to. The simple fact that I've been waffling on now for as long as I have been doing, but still feel like I've barely scratched the surface as to what kind of complexities this album offers, should tell you exactly the kind of experience that the Blue Nowhere has in store for you all. It is a vast, expansive summary of everything the band has achieved up until this point. Aside from a couple of very minor stumbling points, this is about as comprehensive a victory lap as we can expect from Between the Buried and Me. They faced some turmoil on the lead up to this record coming out, okay, so the fact that this has turned out as good as this has in spite of all of that is something of a damn miracle. So, what else can I possibly say about Between the Buried and Me's The Blue Nowhere? Right, I did it! I finally reviewed an album from my favourite band as new. I was beginning to wonder if I would ever get the chance to do this, but The Blue Nowhere has managed to sit extremely comfortably on my already attuned palate. Is this a good starting point for the uninitiated? No, I don't think it is. I would say that the entry point still remains Coma Ecliptic or Automata 2. One is softer and the other less of a time commitment, and while this does contain plenty of mellower moments and isn't the longest of their albums by much, it is still extremely dense and often kind of inaccessible. Now, I personally thrive in such environments, especially when Between the Buried and Me are concerned, but the casual listener might make it to the end of God Terror before deciding that maybe this isn't the band for them. But come on, this many records deep, the band has their core fanbase, and they have the people who will enjoy the dark, whimsical Nightmare Before Christmas bullshit of Mirrored or Unicoil, as we thrived on the surf rock of Bloom and the literal goddamn cartoon noises of prehistory. Nothing scares us, nothing slows us down, and The Blue Nowhere is just another salvo of everything I've come to love from the good ship Between the Buried and Me. And if you're of the faithful as I am, you're gonna have a bloody good time with this one. My personal biases notwithstanding, I still feel that this album is worth a physical purchase. For a band to be this deep into their career and have yet to suffer from writer's block is honestly extraordinary. It'll be interesting to see what they can bring to the table for album 12, but you bet your ass I'll be sitting there waiting, knife and fork in hand, as I wait for the grand reveal of whatever it is these titans of the genre are able to deliver. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion. The album drops on September 12th, so once you've had a chance to digest it, come back here and let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Please do drop me a thumbs up if you liked the video, please do tell your friends about little old me, and please do consider subscribing to the channel if you've been enjoying my silly and irreverent content so far. But until next time, guys, as always, Keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.